just got off the phone with the girl who loves you too. Said you're working on yourself, is she helping with that too? You gave her the time of day. You told her that you would stay. You made me feel the same way. What goes around comes around, that's what I always say.
Okay, so today we're diving into something that I think a lot of people can relate to, dealing with difficult in-laws. But we're not just talking about those typical disagreements over holidays or parenting styles. Like, we're going deeper. We're going deep into the world of narcissistic in-laws.
Oh, yeah.
You know, those in-laws that kind of seem to just suck the energy out of the room and leave you constantly feeling criticized and walking on eggshells.
Right.
So we're going to unpack this whole complicated dynamic using a couple of articles, one titled 15 Signs of Narcissistic Parents-in-Law and How to Deal with Them, and another one called Narcissistic In-Laws, Surviving Narcissistic Mother-Father. Plus, there's this really insightful YouTube video by Dr. Ramani called Narcissistic In-Laws, When You Are Married to the Golden Child. So
yeah, it's interesting because, a lot of people might just brush this off as just having difficult in-laws.
Right.
But it really goes way beyond that.
Yeah.
We're talking about a pattern of behavior that can genuinely impact your mental health.
It's like they have this uncanny ability to turn every situation into being about them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not just that they enjoy being the center of attention, which a lot of people do.
Right.
It's this deep-seated need for control and validation.
Yeah.
Often at the expense of, everyone else's feelings.
Everyone else around them.
Yeah. I mean, just think about it. Do your in-laws constantly need to be the center of attention? Do they steal the spotlight even at their own child's big moments?
Oh, totally.
Yeah. That's a huge red flag right there.
Yeah, and the articles talk about how this can really wear you down over time.
Absolutely.
Right.
Living with that constant tension, not knowing when the next criticism or manipulation tactic is coming from can lead to anxiety,
Right.
self-doubt, and just complete emotional exhaustion. It's like being stuck on a roller coaster you can't get off of.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
So let's get into the nitty-gritty
Okay.
of how this actually plays out. The first article lists 15 signs of narcissistic in-laws.
Okay.
Some of them might seem obvious,
Uh-huh.
but others are much more subtle and insidious,
Right.
like under the surface.
Yeah. One that I think is particularly powerful is this idea of conditional love.
Okay.
They might seem outwardly caring, maybe even brag about their child to others.
Right.
But the actual affection they show is completely dependent on their child meeting their specific expectations.
So it's like this constant game of trying to earn their approval.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you can never truly win this game.
Right.
The goalposts are constantly shifting.
Oh, for sure.
One minute you're being praised for something, the next you're being criticized for not doing it right.
Oh, that sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
And it can lead to some pretty damaging behaviors, right? Like blaming you for their own problems.
Well, absolutely.
Like-
This is classic scapegoating.
Yeah.
They can't possibly acknowledge their own flaws or shortcomings, so they need someone else to carry that burden.
Okay.
And you, as the outsider, become the perfect target.
It's like they're projecting all of their insecurities and frustrations onto you.
Exactly.
Wow.
And if you try to push back to defend yourself or point out inconsistencies in their logic, you might run into the brick wall of gaslighting.
Gaslighting, for those who might not be familiar, is basically a form of manipulation
Right.
where they try to make you doubt your own reality, your own sanity.
It can be incredibly insidious. They might deny things they said. They might twist events to fit their narrative, or even accuse you of being crazy or overly sensitive. And over time, this can really erode your self-esteem and make you question your own perceptions.
Absolutely. And this dynamic gets even more complicated when your spouse is the golden child
Yeah.
of these narcissistic parents.
This is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
The YouTube video and the second article really delve into this specific scenario.
Okay.
Essentially, the golden child is the favored child who often becomes an extension of the narcissistic parent's own ego.
Right.
They're showered with praise and attention,
Yeah.
even if that praise feels hollow or conditional. And often, they are completely blind to or downplay their parents' toxic behavior.
So how does this impact the marriage? It sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It can be incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to build a life with someone who's essentially still enmeshed with their parents in this unhealthy way.
Yeah.
Their loyalty is constantly being pulled, and they might not even be able to recognize the harm their parents are causing.
That sounds incredibly frustrating.
It is.
Like you're trying to point out these harmful patterns, but your partner's completely resistant because they've been conditioned to believe that their parents are always right.
It's a classic case of love is blind, but the consequences can be devastating for the marriage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a tough situation.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty bleak picture so far, but I kind of want to shift gears a bit and talk about like what you can actually do if you find yourself in this situation, because feeling powerless is definitely not the goal here.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because knowledge is truly power in these situations. And one of the first things that both of the articles really emphasize is the importance of educating yourself about narcissism.
So not just recognizing it in your in-laws,
Yeah.
but really understanding the underlying dynamics.
Exactly. Learning about the patterns, the manipulation tactics, the reasons behind their behavior
Right.
can be incredibly empowering.
Yeah.
It helps you to see things more objectively and to anticipate their moves, which can take away some of that feeling of being constantly blindsided.
It's like learning their playbook so you're not caught off guard every time.
Right. And then armed with that knowledge, you can start setting some really clear boundaries.
Yeah, the articles talk a lot about boundaries,
Yes.
but it seems like that can be a minefield in itself,
It is.
especially when you're dealing with people who are masters at pushing those boundaries.
It definitely takes practice and consistency.
Right.
But remember, you're not trying to change them.
Right.
That's a losing battle. You're setting boundaries to protect yourself, your mental health, your marriage.
Okay. And what about those times when you just feel like you're being pulled into their drama,
Yeah.
their manipulations?
There's a technique called gray walking that the articles mention,
Okay.
which can be really helpful in those situations.
Gray rocking, what does that even mean?
So it's essentially becoming as emotionally non-responsive as a gray rock.
Oh, okay.
You don't engage in arguments. You don't try to reason with them. You just don't give them the emotional reaction that they're craving.
Oh, so it's like starving them of their narcissistic supply.
Exactly. And it can be incredibly effective.
Wow.
But it does take a lot of self-control.
Right. And all of this is much easier said than done.
Absolutely.
Right. Especially when you're feeling overwhelmed and emotionally drained.
That's why seeking support is so crucial.
And that can take many forms.
Or of course, it could be talking to a therapist or a counselor who specializes in family dynamics.
Right.
It could be finding a support group of people who are going through similar experiences.
Cool.
It could even be just having a few trusted friends or family members who can offer a listening ear and a shoulder to cry on.
Right. Because feeling isolated and alone just makes everything harder.
100%. And let's not forget about the most important form of support. Self-care.
Self-care can sometimes feel selfish, especially when you're dealing with so much external chaos.
But it's the opposite of selfish.
Okay.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah.
And that's why it's essential to prioritize things that nourish your mind, body, and soul.
Okay.
Whether it's taking a walk in nature, reading a good book, meditating, whatever brings you joy and helps you to recharge, make it a non-negotiable part of your routine.
Yeah. And sometimes self-care means making those really tough decisions, like limiting contact with your in-laws.
Yes.
Or even going no contact altogether.
It's definitely not a decision to be taken lightly, but in some cases, it's the only way to truly protect yourself and your family from ongoing toxicity.
Right.
And this is something that needs to be discussed openly and honestly with your spouse.
Because this is where the golden child dynamic can really come into play.
Yes.
It's not just about setting boundaries with the in-laws. It's about navigating those loyalties and expectations within the marriage.
One of the articles outlines 5 different ways your spouse might be dealing with their narcissistic parents.
Oh, wow.
And depending on where they fall on that spectrum, it can either make things easier or much, much harder.
Yeah, so it's crucial to have those open and honest conversations.
And it is.
Ask the tough questions like,
Yeah.
do you see the patterns? Are you willing to support me in setting boundaries?
Uh-huh.
And most importantly, what are you willing to do to protect our marriage from this toxicity?
Because at the end of the day, the health of your marriage is at stake.
And sometimes, even with the best intentions, things just don't work out.
That's a hard truth. But recognizing when a situation is beyond repair is a form of self-care in itself.
We also need to acknowledge that this whole dynamic gets even more complicated when you add in cultural factors. Like in some cultures, challenging elders is considered disrespectful,
Yeah.
which can make setting boundaries feel almost impossible.
It's a delicate balance, but it's
Yeah.
important to remember that your mental and emotional health are just as important as cultural norms.
Right. And then there's the whole issue of grandchildren, which brings its own set of complexities.
Absolutely. Narcissistic grandparents can be incredibly manipulative,
Oh, yeah.
trying to use the grandchildren as leverage,
Right.
trying to turn them against you,
Wow.
or to undermine your parenting decisions at every turn.
It's like the stakes are even higher when kids are involved.
They are, and that's why those boundaries become even more crucial.
Yeah.
You're not just protecting yourself, you're protecting your children's emotional well-being.
Right.
You're modeling healthy relationships for them.
And sometimes that means making tough choices, like limiting the grandparents' access to the children.
It's never easy, but sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that ultimately protect the people we love the most.
Okay, so while we've talked a lot about the challenges, I also want to highlight the potential for growth that can come from navigating this incredibly difficult experience.
I love that you brought that up because facing these challenges can force you to become more assertive, more resilient, more aware of your own needs.
It's like you're forced to level up to become the best version of yourself just to survive.
And it can also strengthen your relationship with your spouse.
Okay.
If you can navigate this together as a team, supporting each other through the ups and downs,
Right.
it can forge an even deeper bond between you.
So it's not just about surviving.
No.
It's about thriving.
Yeah.
About coming out on the other side stronger and more connected than ever before.
Absolutely.
You know, something we haven't really explored in depth yet is how being married to the golden child
Right.
adds like another whole layer
Yeah.
of complexity to this whole situation.
Absolutely.
Dr. Ramani's YouTube video really dives into that dynamic, and it's fascinating.
It's a unique challenge because you're not just dealing with the narcissistic in-laws themselves.
But also with the way your spouse has been shaped by their relationship with them.
It's like they're still operating under this spell,
Yeah,
unable to see their parents' behavior clearly.
exactly. And the more enmeshed they are with their parents, the harder it can be to break free from that mindset
Right.
and to see the situation objectively.
Can you explain what enmeshment means in this context?
Sure.
I think it's a term a lot of people might not be familiar with.
Yeah, it's essentially a relationship with very blurry boundaries,
Okay.
where the child is treated as an extension of the parent rather than a separate individual
Right.
with their own thoughts, feelings, and needs.
So their identity is like
Yeah.
completely intertwined with their parents.
The golden child's identity becomes intertwined with their parents' ego and expectations,
Right.
making it incredibly difficult to establish healthy boundaries.
So they're almost like a puppet dancing to the tune of their narcissistic parents' manipulation.
That's a powerful analogy.
Ah.
And it can be incredibly frustrating for the spouse who's on the outside looking in, trying to point out the strings that are
Right.
being pulled.
Exactly.
So what happens when you try to have those difficult conversations? To point out the harmful patterns and the impact they're having on the marriage.
It can be met with resistance, defensiveness, even anger.
Oh, wow.
The golden child might minimize the situation,
Right.
make excuses for their parents, or even blame you for causing trouble.
Like turning it around.
Yeah, they might say you're being too sensitive or overreacting.
That's like hitting this brick wall of denial.
Exactly. And it can be incredibly isolating and painful, feeling like you're the only one who sees the situation clearly.
So what advice does Dr. Ramani give
Well,
for navigating this specific dynamic? Because it sounds like you need a whole different set of tools when you're dealing with a spouse who's been conditioned to see their parents through these rose-colored glasses.
she emphasizes the importance of patience and understanding. Remember, your spouse isn't intentionally trying to hurt you. They're operating from a place of, deep-seated conditioning.
So how do you approach these conversations without making them feel attacked or putting them on the defensive?
Focus on your own feelings and experiences.
Okay.
Use I statements.
Okay.
For example, you could say, I feel hurt when your mother criticizes my cooking,
Right.
rather than, your mother is always putting me down.
So shifting the focus from blaming to just expressing your own emotional experience.
Exactly. It's much less likely to trigger that defensive reaction,
Okay.
and it opens up the possibility for empathy and understanding.
But what if, despite your best efforts, your spouse continues to defend their parents and minimize their behavior? What if they just can't see it?
That's a tough situation, and it's one where you have to prioritize your own well-being. You
Yeah.
have to ask yourself how much you're willing to tolerate.
And sometimes that means setting firm boundaries, even if it means going against your spouse's wishes.
It might, And in some cases, it might even mean seeking individual therapy
Okay.
to help you process your feelings and develop coping mechanisms.
Because you can't force someone to see what they're not ready to see.
Exactly. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is to focus on protecting yourself, even if that means creating some distance within the marriage.
So it sounds like we've covered a lot of challenging territory today. Is there any kind of takeaway that you want to leave our listeners with? Something that might offer a glimmer of hope in the midst of all this complexity?
Remember that you have the power to choose how you respond to these situations.
Okay.
You can choose to react from a place of anger and resentment, or you can choose to respond from a place of strength and self-compassion.
It's about reclaiming your power, setting boundaries, and prioritizing your own well-being.
Absolutely.
Even when it feels impossible. And sometimes the most powerful act of self-care is recognizing when a situation is no longer serving you and having the courage to walk away. So we hope this deep dive has given you some tools and insights to navigate your own challenging family dynamics. Remember, you're not alone in this, and there are resources available to support you on this journey. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.